We really appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, you know you're in a very important place, and of course, I would be someone who know that all too well. But first day of free agency this past week, seems as if the Celtics did everything all on that one particular day back there on July 1st. Let's start with the big move. I'll sort of give you the floor here, bringing in big man Amir Johnson. Let's just sort of give us your thoughts on that, if you got any.
Yeah, I mean, I assume most Celtics fans have watched him play for the Raptors and know what kind of player he is. He's very high energy, really a guy who I still think he's just scratching his potential. I think he's a very willing role player, and that's what he was in Toronto. I think if you give him a bigger role, he's going to be a better and better player. And he has the potential to be a little bit of a perimeter shooter. He can certainly do that. Excellent defender, very athletic. When you talk about the modern NBA, if you're a big man, you've got to be able to defend that pick and roll. And he does it very well. He can guard the pick man as well as the roll man. So I mean, he can very easily guard inside and he can guard outside. So I think that's a really good move for the Celtics. It's something that they were really lacking. You look at guys like Sullinger and Zeller and Olenek. That's not a skill set that they have on the defensive end, and I think Amir Johnson really brings that.
Yeah, I can actually already see it now, how much Brad Stevens is going to like him. He also seems to be the classic player that's valued so much, especially by the analytical people. And with the new way the NBA is playing, you just talked about it right there, defends the pick and roll exceptionally well. Very good weak side shot blocker. Very efficient when he did play. And if I'm not, if I recall correctly, he got an injury last year, and Toronto sort of went a little south when he sort of stepped out of the lineup. So I could see a guy like Brad Stevens falling in love with him. I know if Doc Rivers was coach of the Celtics, I could see Doc just throwing that guy out there for 35 minutes a game and not playing out. But one thing that I find interesting is there's high impatience from fans, and I know the mainstream media has sort of jumped on this and mocked the Celtics in a way. Oh, this is all you do in free agency. I mean, what do you have to say to that? Because obviously I offered my thoughts in the opening. What do you have to say to sort of the mainstream reaction to this signing by the Celtics?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, look, do you want to be the Celtics or do you want to be the Lakers and the Knicks right now? To me, that's my immediate reaction is that they have a plan B. They're always going to have a plan A, and the plan A is to go for whoever is available who can be a superstar for your team. And that's how it should be. You should always be in position to do that, and they are in position to do that. If that fails, you better have a plan B, and that's what I look at with the Celtics is what you have to be impressed with. On a national scale, I understand, like on a local scale, you look at it and you have certain expectations and they don't meet them and you're frustrated and you're angry. But you look at it, you got to really step back and take a broad view. It's hard to sign other players from other teams. There's not a lot of teams that have a lot of success with that. Houston has had some success with that, but really show me another. I mean, there's not a lot of other teams who go out there and sign other teams' free agents very often. It's hard to do. So I think if you look at it, what the Celtics have done is set themselves up so that if there's an opportunity to sign another player, they're there and they're ready for it. But if not, they've got a plan B. And to me, that's the most important thing is if you look at this roster, you look at what they accomplished in the second half of last year, I think you've got to be encouraged. I mean, this is a team that is on the rise and will eventually get that guy. Sometimes it takes a while to do it.
Yeah, I also thought, and I mentioned this as soon as they were playing well at the end of last season, if we can even refer to it as last season now, that the expectations now for this season coming up here in 15-16 have entirely changed, and the expectations have risen, and that created all this momentum into the draft night. Draft night eventually ended up being a bit of a dud. And with free agency, it's the same thing. All these fans, they sort of got worked up. They were just having these visions of the Celtics, making, another one of these 2007-like summers, July 31st, 2007, if we want to get a specific date. I would also say, though, that the organization, in a way, sort of not really works the fans up, but they insinuate a lot of what they plan to do. We saw how adamant they were about trading up, and this wasn't, rumors from the dark corners of the internet. They put it on their official Twitter handle, for goodness sake, about Danny Ainge's intention to trade up. Right. They've talked about free agency pretty much the last year and a half this summer, and it ended up producing Amir Johnson. Is it detrimental in a way for the Celtics and the people in that organization to potentially talk of the things that they are going to do that open in the media, as much as we like it when they do so?
No, Larry, I mean, that's a great point, Larry, is that they do tend to raise expectations a little bit with the way that they've approached things, and how excited they are about their draft picks and all that stuff. When you look around, again, you take the national view, other teams aren't that excited about it, or else, the Hornets would have made a trade for those picks if they really thought they were so great. But that is detrimental. I agree with you 100% that that selling the future as cap space and draft picks is dangerous, because cap space sometimes doesn't get spent. And, when you go into, if you leave this summer with only Amir Johnson, Jonas, Jerebko, maybe one other guy, and then you go into next summer, everyone's going to have cap space. There's going to be a huge glut of free agency going on next summer. So, you're really going to be in a position where you're competing against everybody, and you're probably going to lose because, the Celtics are still a middling team. I mean, they're still, 6, 7, 8 seed in the East. And that's probably the best they can hope for. Probably a team that's going to lose in the first round. So, it is something where I like where they are. I think they put themselves in as good a position as they possibly could have, but they do themselves a disservice by selling it as more than that. And that's really what the problem is.
Yeah, I've always applauded the authenticity of the organization. Of course, that's the word Rick Grossbeck used on this show a couple months ago. But I do think that they could take a page a little bit out of the Patriots playbook and sort of hold the phones, especially with the media, because they have, they've made it sometimes sort of like, oh my God, this could happen. And when that doesn't, then the fans and, of course, the talking heads in the media sort of, pick at them. And they shouldn't, but at the same time, I mean, it's like they're a little too honest, in my opinion. If they just sort of, in that sense, if they gave maybe some cliche answers to the media, I think it would help their cause, because I think there are times when they sort of show their cards a little bit too much, and I thought that they did that during the draft, and I was a little concerned, because once things did end up the way they did, you knew there was going to be a backlash. I also sort of want to talk about, if we want to get back to discussing more about basketball on the floor, one free agent they apparently did not pursue, according to Steve Opett of the Boston Herald, one of the great Celtics beat reporters out there, has been for 30-some years, reported that the team never really seriously pursued Greg Monroe. Could you sort of talk about that? I was actually a huge fan of his. I thought he could have been a pretty good fit here, but I guess not. Could you sort of give a few reasons as to why?
I don't know why. Frankly, I thought that was the kind of guy they needed, an interior presence, who's got length and all that. So he's not a great defender, but certainly offensively, he is a guy who you can run your offense through inside. And, when you talk about the modern big man in terms of not necessarily being a guy who needs to stand next to the basket and get his that way, Greg Monroe is really a guy who can step out and hit an 18-footer. He can pass from the high post. To me, that is, when you look at the Celtics offense, that's what you want. I mean, that's a guy that you want, really. I don't know that he would have signed with Boston. I think Milwaukee obviously is a team that's kind of following the same plan as the Celtics, but is a little more advanced in terms of what they've got on the roster, the talent that they have. So, I don't think they necessarily would have gotten him either way. But I was surprised as well that they didn't really get in on him because he does seem to be like the kind of guy that could really suit their needs in terms of their offense for sure.
Yeah, it's also interesting, too, when you see these players signing with a place like Milwaukee. I think it throws out these ridiculous assumptions of, oh, player X, player Y, player Z will never sign here. Boston, Milwaukee, they always sign with the Lakers and the Knicks. Lakers and the Knicks have pretty much struck out in free agency, although it looks like the Knicks are closing in on Robin Lopez here. But it sure seems to me like these players are going to the best situations for themselves. It has almost nothing to do with location.
Yeah, right. That's almost become a fallacy here, and the Lakers and the Knicks really have learned that the hard way over the last few years, and it's really coming into focus this year. But it's something that has been. I don't forget Dwight Howard, spurned the Lakers, and you go way back to 2010 when LeBron spurned the Knicks, and everybody thought he was going to New York, and that just didn't happen. So this is what the league has been trying to do with the rules, with the tax. With the CBA, everything that they've tried to do has sort of led up to this, where Milwaukee has a good chance at signing a top tier free agent as New York or LA, and that's been the case, and that's exactly what they wanted to have happen. So it's really coming to fruition. Everything we went through with the lockout in 2011, when you look at it now, this is what the league wanted, and this is what the league has.
And I want to get into one free agent name before we break quickly for a commercial break. Tobias Harris, a lot of people, they were reaching out to me on Twitter talking about why the Celtics did not pursue him. He's another name as opposed to Greg Monroe. Could you please, if you, to the best of your ability, describe as to why the Celtics really did not seem to have that much interest in Harris, although it looked like they were a little more interested in Harris than they were in Monroe?
Yeah, it did look like they were going to pursue him, and they kind of backed off. I think the indication is that Orlando is going to match. They went after Paul Millsap, and they wanted to try to make their team a little more veteran oriented. But once that didn't happen, it looks like Orlando is going to match whatever Tobias Harris gets. So I think that's one reason why the Celtics didn't bother with the pursuit is they kind of knew that Orlando, once the Millsap thing didn't happen, was going to wind up going somewhere else. So I can understand that he would be a good fit with Boston. There's no question. But it's not somebody that they can really rely on in terms of being able to bring in. So that's something that you make your inquiries, and if you don't think you have a real chance, then there's no real point in making the pursuit.
Yeah, that's sort of the dangerous game you play with restricted free agents, because in my opinion, if there's a restricted free agent that you really, really, really want, it's something that would have to take probably a sign and trade at the end of the day, because, if you dedicate that much time and interest in a restricted free agent and you whiff, you spend phone calls, you spend visits, you can't clone Danny Ainge so many times, you send him around to, wherever the places he needs to be, then you miss the boat on other free agents, like you were talking about a plan B with Amir Johnson. But, Sean, stay with us. Everybody stay with us. We're going to break quickly here, commercial break. We'll be back with Sean Deveney of the Sporting News after a few words. Hey, welcome back into Celtics Beat. We have Sean Deveney here of the Sporting News. We've talked a lot about the Celtics free agency, what they did, what they almost did, what they should have done. Want to talk about a little bit later what they could do in the summer. They still have some time to shape out the roster here. But they did make two other moves back there on the 1st of July. Jay Crowder, 5 years, $35 million. Jonas Jerebko, 2 years, $10 million. Of course, only the first year at $5 million is guaranteed. Sean, in my opinion, I thought they did very well there. It seemed like Jay Crowder, to me, let's start with him, took a bit of a discount, in my opinion, to stay in Boston.
Yeah, he's a guy who a lot of teams really interested in, and if he had waited, he probably could have gotten a better offer as one of those second-wave free agents. But yeah, I really think that's a great signing. He's obviously a very versatile player. If he can play three positions, he can certainly guard three positions. So yeah, that's something that he's one of those guys that kind of makes up this roster. And going forward, when you talk about trying to bring in a big name or a big star or somebody who is a franchise changer, he's somebody that if he's not part of your team going forward, you can certainly he has value around the league, and that's, to me, that's the most important thing for the Celtics is that they've got a lot of guys who have value around the league.
Yeah, it's actually pretty interesting to me. Everyone's sort of freaking out. Oh, how dare you pay a role player $7 million? I mean, that's pretty much the new NBA, if I'm not mistaken, especially when the salary cap goes up next year. I think you're going to be seeing some absolutely ridiculous contracts next year. But I remember Drew Bledsoe was getting 7 years, $49 million. That accounted to $7 million. But that was back in, what, 1994. Different time, different place. Of course, it gets that scary to me and you when you just talk about how $7 million doesn't mean as much anymore. I'm lucky to. I guess we're gonna have to break out the real barrels pretty soon.
Yeah, next year's going to be crazy. Yeah, there's no question that the amount of money that will be available next year, and the raise and the maximum salary is going to be pretty crazy. And next year, if you look at who the free agents are going to be. You do have some, as usual, who are top-tier guys. You had a lot of guys this year, though, who had the opportunity to take a short contract and play the market next year. Who didn't do it? A guy like Kevin Love, for instance, they didn't do it. And so I think it's a much thinner free agent market next year than a lot of us thought it was going to be. And what that's going to yield is, you talk about Jay Crowder getting $7 million a year. He's going to get, $10 million a year next year. A guy like him, a comparable guy. So next summer, I think it's really going to be very fascinating to watch.
Yeah, you mentioned Kevin Love's name. I was flabbergasted when I saw him re-up for 5 years. Because I know there were a lot of people that were just writing off Cleveland entirely. I know they did that before the playoffs. I was sort of saying, hey, let's wait and see if this team sort of gets the NBA Finals, which of course they ended up doing. He's probably going to give that another shot. But at the same time, I thought it all pointed to him taking some sort of 1 or 2 year deal and then taking one more chance at getting another big, huge maximum salary, particularly when that salary goes up. And of course, it gives him another shot with Cleveland because, according to many reports, the guy wasn't all that happy there. But alas, here he is, 5 years. What in God's name happened there over these past, few days or few months, for that matter?
Yeah. I really think that what wound up happening was that I really thought he was going to opt in on his contract next year, so that he could be an unrestricted free agent next summer, wherever he wants. I think Cleveland thought that as well. I think that they thought that's where this was headed. So the fact that that wasn't what happened, Cleveland was sort of in a position where, okay, we need to keep this guy. We need to get him to a contract that we can have going forward, not so much to keep him on the roster, but eventually to possibly trade him. Certainly you're going to give it a chance. You're going to go out there and you're going to see how they do next year. You're going to see how it works with Tristan Thompson and him and Timothy Markov and LeBron. Obviously you're going to have David Blatt back. So, you've got a lot of question marks there if you're Cleveland, but this is still the best team in the East. Probably will be the best team in the East again next year. So it's a matter of, how do they handle the playoffs and eventually, assuming they get to the finals, which I think they will. I think most people would concede that. If they get to the finals, then what happens from there? So if it doesn't work, if things are bad with Tristan Thompson and Kevin Love, you've now got him as an asset, and teams are still going to value him, and you can possibly move him going forward. So for Cleveland, obviously it's a big contract, it's a big risk, but at the same time, I think that they see that as a risk that they can move on to someone else if they need to.
Yeah, that's why I found it very interesting from Kevin's standpoint as to why he opted, in long term, because of course he puts himself, it's not like he's making chum change at the same time too. I'm not going to play poor Kevin Love here, but at the same time, he can't really control his own destiny as to where he wants to go. I know if that's the case, you're sure enough, you're going to hear that once again, Celtics and trade targets, although I think Cleveland would not want to trade in conference, and he probably would not want what the Celtics have. They'll probably want a proven player. But with the remaining portion of the summer, first off, the Celtics are going to have to shape out this roster. They're going to have to cut some corners and dot some I's and cross some T's for them to, field a legitimate team here. Could you possibly talk about what they could do in the trade market coming up here? Because I think that we all expect them to be, not extraordinarily active as what they were 5-6 years ago, but they could be looking at this as a different avenue to sort of round out this team. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's absolutely a choice, and there will be some big names. I've heard Eric Bledsoe is a possibility to be traded from Phoenix. You've got Roy Hibbert from Indiana, obviously as a possible trade target. And these are guys who, Bledsoe you have to kind of commit to the next 4 years for, but a guy like Hibbert, you've got for 1 year. You can see what he can do and possibly go from there. So, yeah, I think the Celtics, like I said, they have a lot of very trade-friendly contracts. And I think going forward, that's the most important thing. That's how you have to rebuild in the NBA. You look at Houston, you look at Daryl Morey and what he's done. They got Harden by a trade. They were able to sign Dwight Howard, but they only did that because they were able to get James Harden first. So, I think you need to be in that position before you can actually succeed, and that's the position that the Celtics are in. So when you talk about a guy like Roy Hibbert, he's a bit of a gamble, but look, if he pays off, that's great. And if he's a guy who's going to come in and really play like he did 3 years ago, then that's great. And if he doesn't, it's a low risk sort of thing. So I would expect to see the Celtics basically as active as anybody on the trade market when that time comes, which will probably be only 5 or 6 days from now.
Yeah, I actually mentioned Roy Hibbert on the show, I believe on last week's show on Around the NBA in 5, and I discussed that I think he could be acquired for really nothing more than an expiring contract and maybe a draft choice or two, largely because he is going to be a free agent after next season and because he has not really played well since the middle of that 2013 season when there were all those rumors about him and Lance Stevenson. But I think he would be an interesting target for him and obviously for any other team as well. Am I sort of in the right boat here? Is he going to really cost a team nothing more than expiring and a pick and possibly a young player? And that's about it?
No, yeah. Right, yeah. I think Indiana's in a position where they'd be happy to be rid of him. So they're okay with whatever happens with him going forward, as long as they can move him and get some sort of asset in return. They don't have to pay more than 1 year on the contract, and they could possibly get a draft pick or two going forward. That's absolutely what Indiana wants right now. And I think, just knowing Roy Hibbert and knowing what his history has been, I think going into the final year of his contract, and knowing that he needs to show himself, and knowing that some of the problems that he's had in Indiana have sort of been self-imposed, I think he'll shed all that. I think he's going to have a really good year next year. So wherever he winds up, I think whoever gets him is going to be pretty pleased. And certainly you'd have to put the Celtics on a list of potential destinations for him.
Yeah, I actually remember a few years ago, I think it was during that lockout when he hired Dr. Mike Ussel, who I interviewed a while back, and how he just sort of completely changed his diet and his workout regimen, lost something like 50 pounds, and then increased his front squat by 150 pounds. And that was when he really broke out. So it'll be interesting to see if he could sort of rededicate himself again. But for him, it looks like it's more mental now than it is physical. But I'm with you. I think that's a gamble that is worth taking because what do you have to lose? You have to lose what is probably going to amount to maybe nothing more than a draft choice or two. And I actually had one of these conversations in our Facebook group that the Celtics have so many draft choices now that it's almost like a supply and demand thing, that we think these first-round picks that they have, they're these oh-so-valuable selections. However, they have so many. Teams know that they eventually have to move them, be it sooner or later. Could that in itself sort of devalue all these, these draft choices because the Celtics do have so many of them and teams know that in the back of their mind Boston does have to move them because it's not mathematically possible for them to use them all?
Yeah, and frankly, it's one of the problems with the fact that the Celtics made the playoffs last year is that a lot of teams are looking at this and saying, well, these aren't lottery picks. These are not teams that that are going to be these are not picks that are going to wind up in the lottery. So that's I really think that those picks are not as valuable as the Celtics would like other teams to believe and like the fans to believe. And you saw that, on draft night. There's no question that they were pushing hard to trade a bunch of these picks. At least 4 first rounders, possibly one of them that could wind up turning into 2 second rounders. But a lot of the other teams saw them as middle first round picks or later, and those are gambles. Those are not lottery picks. Those are not guys that are going to help your franchise going forward. So I think that that when you look at the group of picks that they have, I think that's the fear in terms of trading them is that it's really not as good as a lot of at least what the Celtics would like to have you believe, and I think a lot of other teams know that.
Yeah, that's sort of, I was even thinking almost a conspiracy of what I had, because I personally thought that on draft night it probably would have made the most sense for them to sell some of their draft choices, and I know that there was some rumors leading up to it. But instead, they just used all 4 draft selections. We all know that all these guys won't be on the team next year. And my conspiracy was that if they ended up selling the picks, that would sort of be them sort of saying to how many other teams are in the league, 30, 31, I've lost count these days. That would be them telling everybody else, hey, these picks really aren't as valuable. But instead, they use all the picks. They can say, oh, we picked all these great players, and they are valuable. Am I sort of reaching there? But I actually think there is something there. Am I right?
Yeah, I think they've got good players with their picks. I don't think that they're wasted picks by any stretch of the imagination. But going forward, when you talk about 8 picks in the next 3 years, you've only got 15 spots on the roster. There's only so much you can do, and I think that's the situation they find them in. And like I said, I think they overvalued them and thought they would be able to move them as assets going forward. But the fact that they turned into a pretty good team, that hurts the value, and they're going to wind up having to use those picks. And once they do, it's they're going to get pretty good players who are gambles. They're not going to get guys who are sure things that you can get in the top 10. That's really going to be all the value that they thought they created. That's going to be defined by the fact that they're not going to be quite what they thought going forward. So I really think that it is a situation where they put themselves in a position where it looked like all these picks were going to be huge assets, and as you go forward, you kind of say, well, no, you can't use all those picks for one thing, and if you can't move them, to Charlotte on draft night, then it's kind of like, what's the point? There's not necessarily anything there that's going to really change going forward. They're always going to have this problem when it comes to trading those picks.
Yeah, that's something that does concern me moving forward, and I believe personally that if they are going to make any of these big blockbuster moves, if they use the trade avenue, I think it's going to come with a 3-way trade where they could send some picks to some other team, get a player, send that team. Obviously, you sort of know where I'm going. I don't want to confuse anyone anymore. But last question here before we get you out of here. Pending the Celtics making some huge blockbuster trade, we all do expect them to make a few more moves just to shape out the roster. Really won't be any game-changing move. But pending they do not make a game-changing move, is this team, once again, next year, a playoff team?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's a 7 or 8 seed, and probably a team that loses in the first round. Obviously, Miami's going to be better. Indiana's going to be better. So you're going to have some competition there for those finals. I think the East in general will be a little stronger top to bottom. So I think that's going to be a factor. But with the way they played last year, the way I think Brad Stevens coached, the way that they really seemed to develop a system, almost to where the system was more important than the players, if that makes sense. It seems like they had a way of playing, and they were able to plug guys in terms of what their style was going to be. and it worked. And assuming they can maintain that style and maintain the hunger in those guys. Those guys played. You had a lot of young guys, a lot of guys who maybe had gotten bounced around other organizations and things like that. So you have a certain hunger with that, and I think if you can maintain that going forward into next year, then there should be a team that wins, to me, 45 to 47 games, somewhere in that range. And if they do that, that should be good enough to make the NBA, to make the playoffs in the Eastern Conference.
45 to 47. That's sometimes good enough to win the division. It is.
I think Toronto would be a lot better, but you're gonna have Philadelphia going to be terrible, and you're gonna have New York's going to be terrible. I think the Celtics can really win in that 45-game range. I think that's a 140 last year. Don't you see a 5-game improvement from them this year? I sure do. Considering the way they started last season, I think 45 games not out of reach.
Well, we'll definitely get you back on here in a few months, as we always do, particularly to follow that up. I think there's no better way to get you out of here on that. Sean, happy 4th of July. Thank you so much for joining us. Sean Deveney of Sporting News audience. You can follow him at Sean Deveney. Sean, thanks for joining us on Celtics Beat once again.
Okay, have a good holiday, my friend.